On this episode of Key Talks, we sit down with Rachel Rogers, founder of the ADHD Association of Greater Edmonton. Rachel shares her powerful story of turning lived experience into advocacy and how ADHD Edmonton is changing the way communities support those with ADHD. Stay tuned. It's time for Key Talks.
All right.
All
Here we are
right.
again, crew.
We are back again for another Key Talks, everybody. Woo! And I'm
That's
sitting
getting
over
out
here
our
this
nervous
time.
laughter. Yeah, yay!
Hi. So this
Paula?
is Deanna. This is Paula. This is Mike. This is another
Hey.
Key Talks. And I am so excited for this episode and this topic and this guest we're having today because, you know, we've had Key Talks for over 2 years now.
Over 2 years.
And
this is our third year. Is this our third year of episodes?
I think so. If
Yeah.
we once we
Third
hit
year
once
of
we hit
episodes.
once we hit the fall season, it will
Yeah.
be
3 years.
3
3
years
years.
That's
of
pretty
talks.
cool.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. Yay, us.
And yeah, I've been wanting to do a topic on
Mhm.
ADHD for a long time. This
I,
is
I think I've put a couple are we going to do the ADHD episode? Are we
Yeah.
gonna do the,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of
Yes,
our
we have.
clients and their families, maybe grandparents who were never diagnosed,
Mhm.
maybe living with
persons on
ADHD.
the podcast?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, a lot of questions, a lot of topics. And I just could not be more excited to have the founder of ADHD Edmonton herself, Rachel Rogers, as our guest to discuss this today with us.
Yes.
So-
how do we want to bring Rachel
Yes.
up before we go? Okay.
Yes, we do.
Rachel,
Rachel!
now is your moment. Rachel Rogers, everybody. Deanna, I did just want to jump in on that.
Yeah.
Settle in, Rachel.
Okay.
We are so happy to have you. Deanna, how do you know Rachel? How did
It's
this
funny.
come to be?
It came from like different degrees of separation.
Yes.
Because it was not Rachel, but Cheryl.
Right, Shell Savard.
Cheryl Savard, who was a board member.
She is a new board member.
Okay, and Cheryl's spouse, Todd, is a wonderful handyman for our family.
Okay. There you go.
Yeah, and then our colleague who's currently on mat leave, Lisa, is also volunteering with ADHD Edmonton, and I believe she's co-facilitating an ADHD support group.
Yes.
It's like a pilot
Yeah.
program right
Yeah.
now, right?
Yeah.
It is,
Yeah.
although we're doing an evaluation right now to see whether the board will allow it to go forward as a permanent group.
Okay. Oh, very cool. So, Rachel, tell us who you are and how you came to reach your diagnosis of ADHD.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, first of all, I just want to say that it's a real honor and privilege to be asked to be in this podcast. This is very exciting to be able to spread the word about ADHD. So yeah, I'm a born and bred Albertan, very proud Canadian. Born at a time when ADHD was really an unknown. Nobody knew about it. There was no such label. It's been, historically, it's been looked at for a long, long time, back in the 1800s, but of course, not called ADHD.
Yeah.
And so as I grew up, I knew there were things that were just not quite right, but I didn't know what it was. And of course, my parents didn't, my teachers didn't. And it wasn't actually until after I had worked as a teacher, school counselor, that I realized, gee, I might have ADHD. So I sought a diagnosis from somebody in the city who, this is what he did, was he worked with adults who have ADHD. And, I wasn't surprised at all when he provided a diagnosis, but it was in some ways a relief
Mm-hmm.
and a realization that, oh, I could be really intentional about making some changes in my life. So that gave me some real positives to look forward to. And so I just read everything I could get my hands on about ADHD. And just opened my eyes to what I had been dealing with all my life, but really had no idea why I was dealing with, quirks in behavior, things I might say that were embarrassing.
Yeah, I heard you say the things like you noticed that things weren't quite Right. Are these the types of things that you
Right.
speaking of? Yeah. Like
Right.
the quirks
Yeah.
and behavior. Yeah.
Yeah.
What else?
A bit of impulsivity,
Yeah.
but mostly it was the lack of ability to focus,
Mm.
the inattention, just sort of distractibility. And, I just thought, "Well, I guess it's just me," not thinking that, in fact, there was something that could be done about it. So, the books that I read were just such an eye opener, made me realize, wow, okay, the world needs to know more about this. And I started looking for some support, and really couldn't find anything in the city. I didn't think to look further afield, but, here we go. I finally hooked up with a couple of women from Calgary. They worked with CHAD Calgary, which was very active at that point in 2008.
What was that name?
CHAD Calgary,
CHAD?
CHADD.
Okay.
So CHAD is an international organization. They
Okay.
started in the United States
Okay.
and then had some chapters up here in Canada.
Is it an acronym or?
Yeah, children and adults with ADHD.
Oh, got it. Okay. Thank you.
Anyway, so you can always look that up, CHADD, and find that all over the States.
Mm-hmm.
It's not quite as active in Canada,
Mm-hmm.
but it used to be. So anyway, these two women that I connected with had come up periodically to Edmonton to run a support group. And I said, gee, this would be really great. Can you help me start a support group here? Not thinking at all that we would be where we are now. This is what naivety brings you, right? You think with ADHD, let's just do it. It's that impulsivity, right? No idea what I was getting myself into.
Yeah.
So they said, sure, we will help you. So they helped me with the very first support meeting, provided me with materials and just a lot of tips on how to get going. So that was 2009 that we held our very first.
2009.
Yeah. So we're 3 years short of 20 years.
Wow.
And we have become far more than what I had originally thought about doing. I'm both thrilled and, just kind of surprised at where we are now. But it's wonderful. It's really wonderful. Yeah. Anyway, it's kind of where we are.
Well, I can think because growing up as someone with ADHD and with a lot of like the supports and stuff like that, I think the only option that there really was prior to that was through the LDA and their ADHD group that was a subset of that. But
Right.
What was the LDA? Mike, for
Learning
people who-
Learning Disabilities Association of
got
Alberta.
it. Was sort of the only place that
Yeah.
that you had found support.
Yeah,
at.
well,
Yeah.
for both parents and for supports for
Okay.
kids and
Yeah.
and some for adults, but
Yeah.
like in terms of with diagnosis and like all the evolving space around it, because like we've seen a lot of things like I I'm an early diagnosis person with ADHD, but a lot of people it's later in life. More common, not very common for female diagnoses as well. It's
How old did you say you were again?
I was in my 50s.
You were in your
When you were
50s.
diagnosed.
Yes. Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
That is such a topic that is really forefront to me. It's like come over as like a cascade into my 30s. How many of my university classmates, aunts, friends of friends are all finally getting diagnosed in their 30s and 40s and 50s. And for some, it's like maybe they had their first child. And so all of their executive functioning, everything just, all the systems are gone because baby needs to be attended to. Or someone else who was also a special ed teacher. And same thing, like the patterns were there. Or it starts with maybe their child has grown up a bit. And so then they're diagnosed at 6. And like they have those struggles. I had those struggles too. Oh, right. I just like sometimes, yeah, like maybe postpartum or their child has grown up a bit. Or another woman I got to meet said she went to her doctor thinking, I think I have early onset dementia.
Oh,
Right. Or Yeah, it's so difficult because when you mentioned saying like something's not quite right, like not quite right is not exactly diagnostic criteria that a doctor can be like, okay, well, here's your prescription for not quite right. You know?
Yes, exactly. Well, we found like early years with the ADHD Association, I just had one great big huge support group, but quickly realized that adults with ADHD are not in the same category as parents who have kids with ADHD.
Yeah.
And so, we, very quickly formed separate support meetings because the adults said, no, this is my stuff. It's different than what parents have to deal with. So we went to 2 support groups. And then, one of our facilitators said, I have lived with a man for 50 years who has ADHD. He was not diagnosed until he was late into his 60s. And again, what they learned about ADHD opened her eyes. And she said, we need to have a support group for people who are partners of those who have
that was the
ADHD.
third. So it started with the support group for women with ADHD?
No, just an open group. Whoever had ADHD come to our group. And then we split into the adult and parent, and then we split into adults, parents, or partners and parents.
Okay.
And then we thought, you know what, we're not reaching that young adult group. So we started a group for young adults, sort of 18 to 30-ish.
Okay.
And then another woman joined our board who said, listen, as a woman with ADHD, I present very differently than a lot of these adults who come to the support meetings. So she said, we need a support meeting for women. So we have a support meeting for women. And our most recent group, of course, is for ADHD, people who have either a diagnosis or suspect they may have both autism and ADHD. And that just started in September.
Is that 6? Did I might have lost count. How many support groups is that? Is that 6?
That's
Who's keeping track?
that's 5 support groups now.
5 support groups.
That's right. Yes,
Wow.
exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Wow.
we're a busy group.
Yes.
And of course, we now have a board of directors. I'm currently the president of the board of directors. Yes, we run everything because we don't have funding. We don't have regular donors or a regular source of income. And so, what we get is quite minimal. The government is not supporting us. And so, we everything is free. All our, I wouldn't call them staff. The people who work with us are all volunteers. Nobody gets paid.
Yeah.
And so all our services are free as well.
Wow.
People come to our support groups. They don't pay a thing. We bring in guest speakers, about 6 a year.
Okay.
And I would say that for all these years, there's only one person who's asked for any kind of payment, remuneration for their presentations. So these people come and talk about all sorts of ADHD-related topics. So this year we had somebody come to speak to our ADHD group about autism, ADHD, queerness, and unmasking, which is a huge topic.
We've talked quite a bit about, we do that a lot in our work with working with autistic people for sure. And we've had conversations on previous key talks about masking. And so, the importance of being able to create environments and spaces where people can be themselves without the fear of, being judged or not being accepted or included.
Right. Well, I mean, in so many ways, these disabilities are very invisible. If you were to look at me or Mike, you wouldn't know immediately that we have ADHD. It's just not something that's out there. And so we have had to learn to make adjustments so that we fit into society. I think society now is beginning to learn that in fact it's not our responsibility to fit in to how they function, that it's their responsibility to help us accommodate and find ways to fit in that are not so restrictive,
Sure.
that puts all the onus on
Yeah.
us.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. You know what I realized? Thank you for sharing that. And I believe that we're seeing that shift in organizations and communities and
Mhm.
having programs like yours that are advocating for that. It's awesome. And that you guys have been, your group has now been doing it now for 20 years. And as we're having this conversation, how do you define ADHD?
Uh,
What is ADHD? I mean, I know it's been I don't know if it's appropriate to say it this way, but like a hot topic.
mhm.
Like you said, Deanna, there's so many more people who are getting that diagnosis, who are now aware that, hey, like there's a reason for these ways that I've been feeling or behaving or expressing myself. So what is your definition?
Well, I mean, I could send you back to the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders. But, they list a number, 9 different symptoms and
Okay.
criteria for either primarily inattentive ADHD or primarily hyperactive impulsive ADHD. And so I think in general, the community understands the impulsivity, the hyperactivity, the inattention. And so, in terms of diagnostics, this is what professionals use, clinicians use those criteria to make a diagnosis. But, there's so much more to ADHD than those 3 symptoms or those 9 criteria. I would say most people who have done a lot of research and understand ADHD would call it a disorder of executive function, which might be a new term for a lot of people. But for those of us in this community, it's what we live by. Mike, you'll agree with that?
Yeah, no, just the ability to prioritize what you need to do. And,
Okay.
like there's a lot of different things that lead into it. It's, people will talk about dopamine. They'll talk about, your attention and how that plays. Like, sometimes there's a lot of things where people like, depending on how it impacts you, is it's not necessarily an actual lack of attention. It's actually too much. And then trying to discern, okay, that is what is important. That is what I need to do. But and then how that works. And then also where I can go into a situation and it be a 5-alarm fire and deal with a crisis. And I'm the most alert, smartest person in the room at that point, because I'm able to use that dopamine return of those things to operate at a bit more of what would be a neurotypical level of executive function. Whereas people who are neurotypical would deal with that and they'd be like completely dysregulated themselves. And it's a matter of just how our brains are wired. And again, but that's not necessarily the same way that it's experienced by all persons with ADHD. That's just, but that executive functioning is the key thing. And, there's, we've started talking about masking, but there's a lot of like shame and stuff around it. It's because people they'll see you as with the disability and they'll presume you being neurotypical, and they'll be like, well, why can't you do it? Because you did it this other way. Or, well, you just think about it that way, adopt that. And so it's something that people will, with whether they have a diagnosis or not, get kind of like stuck in. And it's really hard to kind of like build up those supports for yourself, because you need a good community. You need a group where you can kind of get that and give yourself an opportunity to find a way to thrive.
Yeah, one of the simplest definitions that I found, and I probably won't quote it exactly, but it's Dr. Philip Zelazo. He's a developmental pediatrician. Anyway, I might have that wrong too, but basically what he says is executive function is the ability to control or regulate would be another word,
Okay.
your thoughts, feelings, and actions.
Yeah.
So when I have made presentations to, say, parents or teachers, I usually use my grandson. He's 3 now, but when he was first born, what did he control? Not much, He did all the basic functions of, peeing and pooing and eating and crying and sleeping and waking, but that was all very instinctual.
Yes.
As he got older, he learned how to more so control his actions for a certain outcome. He learned how to control his emotions to some extent, given support by his parents.
Mm-hmm.
He learned how to control even some of his thoughts. So I've got a really great video of him making the cat jump. He's using a cat toy and flicking it around and making it jump. And he's just laughing his head off because he's controlling his environment. And so, when you think about it, he was about 1.5 years at that point.
Mm.
And, in 1.5 years, his executive function had grown from not being able to control his environment at all or himself to being able to manipulate this toy and make the cat jump. And so, I could go on and on because executive function for everybody develops over time.
Yeah.
All of us start with basically no executive function. By the time we're in our mid-20s to early 30s, our executive function should have fully developed.
Mm-hmm.
And this is in relation to that our frontal lobe, prefrontal cortex, which covers the frontal lobe right behind our forehead. And as that matures, as our brain matures, that's the last part of the brain to mature. We can see that in MRIs that are taken over time. And so what's happening is that as our frontal lobe develops, as it becomes more connected to various parts of the brain, now we are able to control our thoughts, our feelings, our actions more and more. The problem is that for people who have ADHD, that frontal lobe and the prefrontal cortex doesn't mature as quickly as it does. And in some cases, it doesn't fully mature. And so when you think about it, you expect certain kinds of behavior, certain abilities to regulate your behavior, your thoughts, and your feelings as you get older. Well, people with ADHD, that's a little bit delayed. And so when we say, can you just act your age? Well, actually, a lot of these kids cannot literally act their age. So what we expect as adults from these kids is more than what they can produce.
Mm-hmm.
So I see that as a real.
I totally agree. I would agree with that for just like if we're saying like neurotypical children. I think we have this expectation of like development and like that executive functioning way too early. So then imagine a child who also has ADHD and then you have that expectation. It puts them at such a what would you say, like a deficit, like puts them behind in their opportunities or how we're seeing them, right?
Exactly.
I
Which
have a
creates
few,
challenges.
I've got a few concepts that are floating in my head that I think also wrap around executive dysfunction, and you can verify that or let me know if I'm off kilter here. But rejection sensitivity dysphoria, right? So if I am defining it correctly, for example, it could be that a put down or an insult can like really physically hurt as much, or it's just like that really viscerally it can affect you more than a neurotypical person might bounce back from that hardship, so to say.
Is that a common thing for a person with ADHD?
It as we have heard first person accounts through our support groups,
All right.
they are saying yes. Now, we have to be careful about calling it dysphoria because it's not an actual diagnosis. It's not a formal diagnosis in the DSM-5. However, so many people with ADHD experience rejection sensitivity, which basically in their minds is anything that they perceive as rejection or an insult or criticism. It's not necessarily that the other person has actually criticized them or insulted them or said anything negative.
Yeah, sometimes
Okay.
what it is they're feeling the kind of like they're reevaluating what has kind of gone on, and because of their attention trying to discern what they needed to learn from that, they kind of the brain kind of goes into a bit of a kind of like a rapid fire of trying to understand its environment and stuff like that, and it can result like it can be from the source of a traumatic event, or it can be even like the process of dealing with like trauma and masking in those situations. Yeah.
Right.
And the people have said, I know that they weren't really trying to be mean to me, but I just had this major reaction. I just got either really angry or really anxious. What did I do? I don't know what I did wrong. And so it's that whole ability to regulate the emotions comes into play here.
Yeah,
right?
I was going to say, like, how do you support a person with managing that and deciphering between the perception versus this is a part of how my brain is perceiving because of my ADHD. So it's maybe not the person, maybe it's the ADHD. Like, how do you support someone through that?
Well, I mean, I've always said that when you get a diagnosis, or even if you don't have a diagnosis, education is so, so important. In fact, in terms of treatment for ADHD, it's usually multimodal. So you start with education, like what I did when I first was diagnosed. I
Yeah.
read everything I could find out,
Yeah.
and I realized, that's why. Oh, I understand now. So that education piece, whether you're an adult, a teenager, or a child, is really, really important.
Yes.
Once you understand that it's not your fault, it's the way your brain is wired. It is the fact that there are certain structures in the brain that are just a little bit smaller than most people, the neurotypical person. And then hopefully you stop blaming yourself for some of the behaviors and the reactions you get from people.
Okay. Thank you for sharing
Yeah.
that.
And a big part of with dealing with that is yeah, like we're mentioning shame and blaming yourself, but also like working about navigating your world in a positive way, so you don't just also start blaming others, because as much as your brain is that way and the world is well, I would actually argue these days it's actually more designed for people who are neurodiverse than it is neurotypical, because everyone will have they'll make the term, oh, that's just my ADHD, when they're not. But that's because like attention has become such a currency in our society that people are at the point of inattention and they don't even realize it. And then, someone with ADHD, for us to like work with our attention in the world, it is an exhausting part of dealing with that executive dysfunction. But someone else can just snap out of it and then they're like back on their day. And the reality is you have an onus in terms of like making sure that you're supporting yourself, because the world is, a very differing place, and it is a very unique perspective. And you have to find those effective coping strategies, the medicines or whichever whether it is a medicine or a strategy that works for you, so that you can navigate the world, so you can self-advocate for yourself and really effectively, be your best self.
Yeah, one of the memes that I love a lot, and I include this at the beginning of a lot of my presentations, goes like this. Having ADHD is like walking up a down escalator. You can do it, but it's exhausting.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I just think that encapsulates so much of the energy and effort that we who have ADHD have to put into life in order to seem like other people, in order to manage like the rest of the world. And so therefore, that effort is part of that whole masking piece. The work that I put into what I do takes me so much longer and takes so much more effort, but I do it so that I look like everybody else.
Because now I've got like even more concepts floating in my head. I think the next one I was thinking of is time blindness. And even the strategies I've heard from friends of friends, it still seems to kind of feed into the masking and the extra steps you have to take. So, for example, I've got a friend who her stopwatch, the clocks in her house, the microwave, the car, all of them are 30 minutes ahead of the actual time just to help with transitioning from activity to activity. And another one is a friend who does a weekly game night. And instead of saying that it's at 7 sharp, it's like, well, our drop-in is between 6 to 6:30. Like, so everybody will trickle in between 6 to 6:30 and stuff like that.
We start all our support groups at about 7:05.
7:05.
To allow for people who are a little late arriving.
Great.
Yeah. So I get that with setting the clocks, because when I grew up, we always set our clocks 5 minutes ahead.
Okay.
We probably needed half an hour, but we had them 5 minutes ahead.
Yeah.
But this is very typical ADHD, that whole time blindness. We do not know how to not just manage time, but we're just not really aware of time. So if somebody were to ask me, so how long do you think it'll take you to finish that meal? I don't know until I finish it.
Yeah.
I don't estimate time well. And that's pretty typical of ADHD, which is why I remember reading this book called Scattered Minds, and it was by
Gabor Mate.
And one of his anecdotes was that he had to do rounds at the hospital at 9 o'clock. He was expected to be, in the ward at 9 o'clock in the morning to do rounds. And so at 5 to 9, when he's still in the shower, he is not late because it is not 9 yet. And so and I haven't read this anecdote recently, but he talks about hopping down the hospital, hallways, taking off his boots because it's been raining outside to try to get to the rounds without being too late. And it's just so typical. And again, something that we have to figure out how to manage, because that doesn't work at work.
Yeah. In a lot of workplaces, like punctuality is very important, right?
Absolutely.
Since you brought Gabor Mate up, I would want to know if you're open to the question or what your perspective is on his thoughts around ADHD. I follow him quite a bit and read a lot of his stuff. And one thing that I know he's very speaks to a lot is that the environment is a big indicator of health and mental health. And he ties ADHD to nurture rather more so than nature. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that matter. And hopefully, Gabor, I've really summarized that from his years and of experience and wisdom. But to keep it very simple, he does speak about the environment being the key factor in the development of ADHD and the genetics passed and the stress and genetics passed from the family.
Yeah. Well, we know ADHD is highly heritable. So we know genetics is involved.
Yeah.
So, when it comes to nurture versus nature, I'd say nature has a big hand in this.
Yeah.
Nurture, I compare a child who's been raised in a home where the parents are neurotypical. This child has ADHD, but the parents are neurotypical. So perhaps the ADHD came from a grandparent or whatever. And so these parents have structure in the home. There's lots of routines. They have the child, the child knows what's happening tomorrow and the day after that, even a year later or a week later. They know when supper is. They know when they have to do their homework. etc. So that child with ADHD, their symptoms probably are not as
Prevalent, right?
as prevalent or maybe not so much expressed
Yes.
because they've learned all these, they've got the structure and they've learned all these strategies and routines. A child, on the other hand, who has ADHD, but perhaps one parent or both parents have ADHD, who do not provide the same structure and the routines, etc., that child will express their ADHD symptoms more so because they have not had structure placed in their lives. They do not have any routines in their lives. They do not know what to expect from minute to minute. And so, I would say that especially the mothers who tend to be the nurturers, the caregivers, the ones who provide that routine, if that mom has ADHD undiagnosed and a child with ADHD, that makes it doubly difficult for that child to feel in control.
Yeah. You explained that so beautifully.
Thank you.
You really, really did. Like that has been something I've kind of grappled with, and just the way you explained that just now was so simple and eloquent and clear. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that.
It really speaks kind of to working with what is your tribe, and that's the value in having the group and community, because so much of what your strategies that will support you is based on those other people that you're going to be co-regulating with. Because in that same environment, you might have, we were talking earlier about people who have postpartum and then things falling off the rails. You might have the neurodiverse parent, but their strategies lend itself towards structure in a positive sense, and then of course it can always kind of fall apart. But then again, it's like everything from just having like the right set of friends, or the right opportunity, the right activity in someone's life, so that they can find I remember one of the groups I had been in way back when of someone was really advocating, get that adrenaline rush, go for a workout first thing in the morning. It's your natural Ritalin right there and stuff like that. And for some people, that was a structure that really worked for them. But again, it's diverse, whether it's that community that nurtures it. Another big one that we're hearing now, and this is, yesterday I heard a radio show where they were talking about inclusion, and they made some terrible remarks about inclusion. But we're seeing now, like, one of the most common ways that people support each other who have ADHD, autism, is body doubling. And this is something that someone who is not as neurotypical can benefit from, but where we learn that all these strategies of that group and community, it's not just co-regulating for people who have differing bars on their varying levels of attention, executive function, and whatnot, but it's where these structures, again, what you would find in the neurotypical home, or these things that create those positive supports that we can build out and help everyone. Those are things that really help everyone. And so it's something that it's really important, what the work that you do in building those communities, because that creates an opportunity for someone who may not have that, and they're probably seeking it out. And sadly, these days, you can get really easily caught in the algorithm of doctor, reels and whatnot. And you get so many things conflated when it comes to ADHD. Like sometimes when I'm, being the elder ADHDer of 40 plus years of knowing my diagnosis, and, probably spending the past, 30 years of really being the advocate, after, I had to really take the reins from my parents and self-advocate, that it's something that, you find that people, they're real. Sorry, I lost my complete train of thought. There you go. It can go right out in a second. It was,
see it here.
I was there.
The ADHD.
The ADHD. And it's because, you're talking about the idea of the supports and community, and making sure that everyone is properly supported. And if you don't have those mechanisms, when those things that are more challenging for you, you won't necessarily find the success that you're looking to find, whether you're neurotypical or neurodiverse.
And that kind of takes us back to what Dr. Mate says about nurture, right?
Mm-hmm.
The environment is what helps us regulate our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors. Losing my train of thought too.
We're weaving several complex thoughts at the same time, and you're trying to make sure you get it out.
Right.
And yeah.
We often say that the most, trying to think
well,
of the word now.
I can just kind of bridge in with a couple unique examples I've heard of body doubling. So one is a law student who realized that the only way he could complete any of his assignments and writing and so on was to do it in a cafe. So he always hugged some corner of a Starbucks, what have you, to do all of his assignments. And he didn't know what it was. He just thought, I just need the ambiance, I just need the smells and the conversations over there. And then it's like, oh my gosh, I was body doubling. Another one was during, COVID lockdown period. And we had some dysregulated parents who were trying to just get stuff done. And two of them agreed to do like a sort of Skype. Sorry, I know Skype's not the thing anymore, but like a video call. But they didn't have to talk to each other. They would just be on call with each other. And then that was their virtual way of body doubling and just having somebody to, look pretty cold outside, huh? And they would still be cleaning their house or doing what have you as And I just thought, what an interesting way to make that happen.
And then just as you're saying that, it's making me think of what you both were saying and what I heard from you is like connection. Connection. Yeah. And from you, like the nurture, the love, the connection,
the environment,
the stability from you, like just knowing that someone's there.
Yes.
Right. And then me thinking about what you've created in 2009. What was it?
2009.
2009.
Yeah.
And what a difference that I know has made in hundreds of people's lives.
We hope so. Yes, we hope so.
And with that, and so I wanted to ask you got your diagnosis in your 50s. To me, that seemed like that set off a force in you. I'm wondering, and so I see that. And a lot of people, I think you're right, they mask their ADHD and they may feel ashamed with it. And I see you using it as a source of power and strength. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that a little bit and how you give that to your community as the president and leader of the ADHD Association. Because what a gift to have a leader like you. Yeah.
Well, I've always been the kind of person who, A, loved to volunteer, B, saw a problem and thought, what can we do about that? And I love people. I'm a people person. So starting a support group, which I felt would have been so helpful for me, was just sort of a natural thing. And I tend to throw myself into whatever project comes along, full-throated, wholehearted, all in. And when I see the people who have been affected and the people who come forward and say, I'd like to volunteer, this is important to me too, that gives me hope and it gives me energy to soldier on. I mean, there have been down times and there have been high points too. But, when I sit in on some of those support meetings and I see how the people who participate are so honest and so vulnerable about the things that they struggle with, those challenges in their life, and how the other people in the group come around them and surround them and say, me too. This is what I did for myself. I don't know if that'll help, but this really helped me. And they share freely from their own lives about the resources and the people who have given them a leg up and helped them function when they were struggling so hard. So that's always been inspiring for me to know that people are coming into those chat rooms or those virtual online rooms and saying, me too.
Yeah.
This is my people. You are my people. And, I'm here for you.
And that knowing that you're not alone, we know how powerful that is just for humanity,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Like for humanity, and especially for a group who, may carry that shame that you're not alone. I
Right.
hear you. I see you.
Yes.
Is so powerful. I wanted to bring up medication and just hear your perspective.
Can
on
I
that.
interject
Yes,
one
yes,
really
yes,
thing
Mike.
quickly there,
Yeah.
though? One of the things that, just to close out the thing about the community
Sure.
there,
Yeah.
is you basically are talking about the love language of persons with ADHD, because a lot of people who are neurotypical don't necessarily know this, but when a person with ADHD comes up with a parallel story, whether it is based on their own experience, that is literally their saying that is their wholehearted listening. That is them giving themselves, because they're picking that they've listened, they've found the point of where they are at. And it's one of the hardest things that I find. My neurotypical friends are like, you just wanted to say your story. And I'm like, no, I hear what you have. I literally picked from my heart this, and I'm sharing it back because it's my hope of not just like, oh, that's okay and you'll get through it. It's like, it's that connection and really wanting to be that person to help in the room. And that's medicine in itself. And maybe something that we can get back into before as I hop back.
That, Mike. I think it's
Yeah.
important. I mean, I think that's such a great point for just people, just every person. Like, let's not assume why people are telling or sharing, right? Like, let's create space for people to share and express themselves with us without us judging or questioning. Let it just be. And then honoring it, perhaps, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Can be what we do. And so, great medicine.
Yes.
and we do know there are a lot of we do know there are medications out there to support ADHD. So I'd love to, hear a little bit from you on that.
Sure. So the first thing I want to say is I am not a medical doctor. So just get that on the table. So the information I provide is very general and largely learned from the people who come to our support group who are on medication or are wanting to try it. But, I've done some reading as well. So yes, there are quite a few medications that can be used to treat ADHD. I think what we need to do is go back to the whole aspect of executive function first, and that aspect of our brain, the frontal lobe, that is not carrying the right messages to the right parts of the brain for us to be able to truly regulate our emotions and our thoughts and our actions. And so the dopamine, that neurotransmitter, the norepinephrine, that neurotransmitter, our brain is amazing. The more I've read about it, the more I learn about our brain, I think it's incredible. And so the signals that are sent from one neuron to the next sends these neurotransmitters from one neuron to the next. And they sort of sit like this. There's a little gap in the middle. It's called a synapse. And so one neuron will be sending these neurotransmitters. And this neuron has what they call receptors. So they kind of take up these neurotransmitters, which send messages to other parts of the brain. So it just kind of keeps going. The problem is that sometimes these receptors aren't very effective.
Okay.
Not very effective. They don't receive as well.
Yeah.
The other issue can be that this neuron that's sending might suck up or vacuum up the neurotransmitters before they get a chance to get transmitted. And so when we talk about not getting the message or the messages not getting through, that's kind of what happens. The medication, the stimulants, and even the non-stimulants, what they do is they help keep those neurotransmitters in the synapse long enough for the receptors to grab onto them. And they prevent, in some cases, the neuron sending from sucking up and vacuuming up those neurotransmitters before they have a chance to get to the receptors.
Wow.
That's just a really primitive way of me trying to explain why medication can work very effectively, because that medication massages that piece so the neurotransmitters get to where they need to be, send along the message where it should be sent, and then we feel a little more neurotypical, right? We're behaving and acting and thinking and feeling like neurotypicals. So that's really a very simple explanation.
I think we need a children's book on what you just explained in that way. Was that ever brilliant?
Well,
have you ever heard it
come from me
like that? I mean, I've heard pieces of neurotransmitters, but the way you explained the reason how medication would work and what it's actually doing was like, for me, I mean, that was fantastic.
It wasn't original to me. I've just stolen from various people.
Well,
Dr. Russell Barkley is really good about explaining that whole process.
Question. Is there a way to have that transmission work in the way it's supposed to without medication? Or is that an effect of ADHD that is just not possible without medication? And does that question make sense?
Yeah, and a lot of people have asked that. I mean, why would I put my child on medication for the rest of his life? You know, they don't want to do that. Very understandable for parents. What I would say is that we've seen, and there's been a ton of research done on medication, years and years and decades. It's, the stimulants and the non-stimulants for ADHD have been more thoroughly researched than any other medication for children.
Okay.
So there's a lot of good information and research that shows it can be very effective. Not medicating your child is sort of saying, well, sorry, you've got diabetes, but we're not going to
That's exactly
put
what's
you
on
on
my
any
mind
medication
right
for
now.
that. What, your child can't see the board very well from where they're sitting? Just put them right next to the board. No, don't give them glasses. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So, I mean, this is the same thing with ADHD. If you know that medication can work very effectively, why not? Now, doctors often put kids on a trial of medication. That's exactly what it is. It's a trial. Is this going to work? Is it not? And there are a certain percentage, a very small percentage of individuals for whom medication does not work at all. Which is why we have Dr. Paul Soper at the Glenrose Hospital, because he works with people for whom medication is not effective. And so, thank you, Paul. Yeah, I would say ADHD is a chronic condition.
Yeah.
Until there are some ways to resolve that lack of neurotransmitter transmission, that's just how it goes. However, a book that I've been reading recently about ADHD medication indicates that the research shows that the longer you are on medication, the more of a positive effect it has on your brain. Both the brain structures that are smaller than usual, and also how well your brain transmits the neurotransmitters. So, if a parent says, no, Or if a person, an adult says, not doing medication, sorry, that's just not my deal, they can certainly use strategies, coping strategies. All of us do that. I mean, I was on medication for a short while and it was fantastic. The thing is, I had so many side effects that I just couldn't be on the medication anymore. So I have learned how to find strategies that work for me for my time blindness, for my management, my organizational skills, for, just all of those things that are so typical of ADHD.
Yeah.
Or like myself, severe ADHD, and I was using neurofeedback, and I actually was part of the original test group that did. It was Dr. Fitzsimmons with the cognitive re-regulation program. Yes, that does sound like a brainwashing, but no, the similar to something that we use here with biofeedback in the form of heart math, where they connect you and they can teach you kind of that awareness, and then they also get you to do the activities that would require the focus, where you can actually kind of like have that introception of with your body and be able to then try to replicate that on top of the strategies.
You're training your brain.
Yeah, training your brain. Like one of the things, because when I was younger, the most common medicine was Ritalin, and I am a 6'6" man, and I probably would not be the height that I am if I was on Ritalin, because it actually has been directly correlated to like impacting some elements of growth.
Okay.
For some individuals. That's not everyone. It is a potential side effect, but like on the other side of it, I have probably since 16 been abusing caffeine on a level that I have, would not most normal people could not consume. And for me, it's the difference is I can sense the neurological effect, but like things like the physiological effect. It's like, it's like the same thing as someone who's on Adderall or whatever. You feel the heart racing and stuff like that. And again, but then the calming of the mind and stuff like that. And just understanding what works for you in terms of your coping strategies. And unfortunately, it also is something that, like, in diagnosis and also advocacy and trying to get stuff for people who've been dealing with their whole life. I'm sure with your late diagnosis, you probably had a lot of challenges of even with getting the medication, because doctors are very reluctant to prescribe because of perceptions, not necessarily and because they're like, well, hey, what you've been doing, like you seem to be okay, is something you commonly hear. And I've coached colleagues and other people who've had to deal with that with like later diagnoses. But the reality is you have to advocate for those needs. You're like, well, I want to try the medication. I want to try, there's the anti-anxiety classes and antidepressants that will be utilized. And for those, a lot of the research where it is, we know what it does, but we don't always know what mechanism it's exactly fully addressing, because something that I know you're really adept in is dealing with trauma, because Paula has a book, My Name is Trauma, and that was written with her husband, and we do a lot of trauma informed care. But a lot of people present the symptoms of ADHD because of trauma, and they don't have that wiring. That's just part of like the rewiring, as part of the fight or flight that occurs. And so for some of those people, the medication might not work, but then we don't know why it's the anti-anxiety or the antidepressants that work in those cases. But it's just about making sure that you find the right supports, that you advocate for your needs, and understand, like, when you're like, this baseline, while it might seem good for you, it isn't my level of success. So you can advocate for something that's better or greater. And that's something even with Key, like our practice is success coaching for all abilities, and something that we really advocate for, and finding something so that people can understand how to get to their best version of themselves, not necessarily change who they are because of dealing with a disability, but like, what are the supports? What are the strategies? What are those things that really build you up? Because dysregulation And that's like the biggest thing that we're all, those of us with ADHD or even neurotypicals, when you're dysregulated, it's that escalator going up in reverse.
When emotions are high, intelligence is low.
Another one of our,
It's one of my favorite quotes. Yeah.
And so like you have to really find what does work for you and be able to like take ownership over it. Because like end of the day, when I wake up, you know, I have to take ownership of what I need to do, because if I didn't, I'd be late all the time. When's the last mastermind you ever thought that I've been late for? Haven't. And it's about having those strategies that you can build out, but also giving yourself the grace when you're having a bad day. When you're not able to like
grace and self-compassion.
Exactly.
And not then beat down on yourself.
And a big one for me is not blaming others too. Like that's a thing. And there's so much good information out there and bad information.
That makes me think you have these awesome books here. Great information. Did you want to speak to any of them? Share? I see a few. Anyone you would recommend to the listeners, the viewers, a favorite?
Well, let me talk about two of them.
Okay.
The one on the far side over there, ADHD 2.0, written by Ed Hallowell and John Rady. They wrote some of the original books on ADHD, Driven to Distraction, etc. This is the newest book that they've written, 2.0, and they provide a lot of updated information about ADHD. Ed Hallowell himself has ADHD and a learning disability. And so, he's got lived experience. So I would recommend that book as a real updated version of what they've done in the past. Awesome. Dirty Laundry is a really cool book. This is a young couple from the UK. She has what I would consider very, very extreme ADHD and severe ADHD. And they were finding it difficult, right, as a couple to manage her impulsivity, her hyperactivity, her inattentiveness, et cetera, et cetera. And then she was diagnosed, and it changed their lives. And they started doing these TikTok videos about strategies that worked for them as a couple. And out of those TikTok videos, which were very popular, came this book, Dirty Laundry. And so each chapter is short and sweet, and each chapter is about a specific difficulty, a specific challenge that she has in life. And she talks about it. And then he writes in the second part of the chapter about the things that he has learned to do to help her make accommodations and do things in a more appropriate way. So it's a really cool book about just a young couple who've learned how to make this work for them. And cool. I think for couples who are in a relationship where one person has ADHD and the other person does, there can be a lot of conflict because the person who doesn't have ADHD says, I only wanted 2 children, but I have 3. The spouse is the 3rd child. Do I have to remind you about everything? Do I have to, So this is a really cute book and very practical on how couples can kind of work it out between the two of them.
I think that's so good because you know what? As I'm laughing, like you have to laugh. At the end of the day, a sense of humor, a little bit of laughter, some lightheartedness to get us through this wild and crazy life.
Absolutely.
It's just a little bit of what we need in that ingredient.
And laughter is the best medicine, right?
So cool. Yeah.
Well, and having those things for partner supports, I think is important because like if it's not part of your conversation in your relationship, unless you are going to be exhausted by masking for the rest of your life, it is going to be part of the relationship. Like I I always, when I'm starting to date someone, I kind of have my my little debrief of Mikeisms, because the reality is like there are the things that I do that are my ADHD, but then there are also the things that are me and that I do have to take ownership over. It's not all just a disability, and that because I've seen friends who will definitely scapegoat it and be like, well, that's not necessarily fully that. That's also you having a completely different element of it, and having everything from a good boundary system, a good ability to advocate to something, to have the right strategies at the right time, or like taking ownership. Okay, this isn't necessarily a fight. This is like I'm chasing dopamine right now. And knowing, okay, I have to put my foot off the gas right now. Yeah.
I want to go back to your caffeine use as a teenager.
Yeah.
A lot of parents are very afraid that their child would become addicted to this medication. And they don't want their child with an addiction. But as the research shows, people who self-medicate with whatever, gambling, alcohol, you name it, caffeine, you name it, because people with ADHD are much more vulnerable to addictions.
Yes.
If you are not on medication, the chances of you becoming addicted to something is much higher than if you are on ADHD medication.
Yeah, that's such a great point. It actually makes me think like medication, and from what you're sharing, is a good starting point at the very least, right? And then building the strategies around that, understanding the environment's impact, the parent's role, your spouse's role, your partner's role, and how that can all work to support all people, and specifically, those living with ADHD, are all important factors that can then empower that person even more.
Exactly.
Right. But it sounds like, to be able to get some stability, some mental health, helping that child or person to just get grounded in who they are.
Right.
And get those transmitters to actually know what it can feel like.
Right. And it's actually, especially for children, because I worked a lot with kids, I always say to parents, the medication actually helps your child learn the strategies you're trying to teach them. They now have the attention and the focus to be able to think about and absorb what you're teaching them and put it to use. Without the medication, that often just kind of goes by the wayside, in one ear and out the other.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So, oh my gosh, we're at an hour and 15 minutes.
Really?
And like,
Yep.
I know. I'm like, I have so many questions. But just to honor the time and the time we set out, any final message you would like to share with our listeners, the community? What would be your take-home message?
I think the most important thing that we all need to remember and to learn is that this is not a behavior problem. And this is what, for many, many years, we have often thought, kid just has a behavior problem. And why doesn't their parent control them better?
Yes.
It's not a behavior problem. It is a neurobiological issue. It's medical. And so if we could just change our lens and see it as a medical issue, not a behavior problem, I think that will encourage a lot more understanding, empathy, and compassion for the ADHD community.
I love that. And if I may add, and is that it's and it's not just there, it's everyone is responsible in supporting and connecting.
Good thought.
That each other to thrive in who they are.
Exactly.
Right? We
Very
all have that responsibility in supporting that.
I like
right?
that.
Yeah.
I like that.
Okay, good. Yeah. Thank you.
You're
Rachel.
very
wow,
welcome.
what a wonderful, insightful conversation. Deanna, thank you for bringing
I'm
Rachel
hoping that
on.
every podcast, every support group, every passing day will have fewer and fewer children, teens, adults internalizing and thinking that it's laziness like lazy, sensitive, dramatic, disorganized, and we have better knowledge. We have better like, I don't know, it's like literature, nomenclature, vocabulary about what ADHD is now. Like even ADHD and the DSM-5, like you could not diagnose those two together until 2013.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
It's still, there's still so much more room to learn and grow.
So much.
Yeah.
So much more. Absolutely. I totally agree.
Yeah.
Wow. Very good. Well,
Well,
we're part of the conversation.
All right.
We were here to talk. We talked the talk. Thank you, Rachel.
You're very welcome.
So Rachel, again, is the president of the ADHD Association of the Greater Edmonton.
Of Greater Edmonton.
Of Greater Edmonton.
Right.
They
Yes.
have 5 different types of support groups. It was couples.
It's for parents, adults. Right now, adults and partners are combined.
Okay.
Young adults, women, and those dual diagnosed ADHD.
And I assume you have a website. We'll share
Yes.
that through our line of communication, a website
Absolutely.
to learn about these resources and support groups that are available thanks to your courage, your strength, your resilience, just your power. Thank you for sharing that with you. We're very, very grateful.
Well, thank you for having me here
You're welcome.
and allowing me to spread the word about ADHD and, about our organization. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. You're welcome.
Thank you.
now we have to do
Yes, we have.
our closing handshake. We did not brief you on this.
No.
This is a surprise.
Okay.
So it starts out with our fists are out,
Okay.
and we go like this. We go whoosh with our fingers like this, and then back to our like that.
As
Okay.
Devin, one of our coaches, likes to say, it's like you got ski poles. You let go of the ski poles, and then you got your ski poles because then you need to hold on to those ski poles.
It's a way that we just share thanks and
Oh,
celebration.
I
and
love it.
of
I like to-
your awesomeness and us. being
Yeah.
I like to call
Oh.
it a heartbeat all in sync.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Okay,
All right,
All right,
so-
so
there we go.
all right, 3, 2, 1, whoosh! Yay! Thank you.
Oh, fantastic.
Key Talks is a project of Key Creative. Our co-hosts are Paula Audrey Rivero and Deanna Halls. Our production team is Michael Schwake, Jessa Dupuis, and Deanna Halls. Music by John Rivero. To reach out to us or access services for you or your family, visit keycreative.com. That's QICreative.com and fill out our online intake form. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.